Welcome back. Yeah, man.
Welcome back, man.
Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday to you,
Wednesday.
buddy. Yeah.
It's Wednesday.
It is a Wednesday.
Gutting!
All right, so it is a
Gutting.
Wednesday. We have established this, which means it is another edition of our Wednesday feature where we focus on law, sometimes the unconventional side, sometimes the very conventional. It's called So Now What? And we are joined once again by our friend, our expert lawyer and director at legalese.co.za, Eitan Stern. Today's question is, I've hired someone to come clean in my home. So now what? Okay, does raise a couple of interesting questions. We'll be focusing on what your legal rights and recourses are when it comes to the legalities of having a house helper come clean in your home.
And a very practical question, because I think it applies to quite a great deal, many South Africans.
Yeah, it's a very South African socio-economic situation.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's a thing in South Africa. We've got a lot of people who need employment, and because of that, we've got a lot of types of jobs that people are encouraged to hire in lots of different sort of settings. So in South Africa, obviously different to the rest of the world, you've got a lot of house helpers and cleaners.
Yeah. So are there any laws that govern and regulate the relationship between domestic employer and domestic employee?
Great question. And this is something everyone who has a domestic worker needs to know about. There are definitely laws around it.
Yes.
Lots and lots of laws. So most of them come from an act called the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, Sectorial Determination 7, but you don't need to know that. And there are laws, because we have a history of discrimination or unfair labor practices in South Africa, pretty much all types of labor in South Africa are pretty well regulated and protected. So employees and workers in all instances are pretty well protected in South Africa. And so that definitely includes domestic workers. And so if you want to know what the laws are, it's definitely worth kind of reading up about it. There are lots of useful guides online. But first things first, there are employees and there are 100% laws around having cleaners in your home.
Do those guidelines then extend to minimum wage?
Yes, for sure. So there's the National Minimum Wage Act, and it sets a minimum wage for domestic workers. It sets it pretty low at 15 Rand an hour. So it's low, but luckily there is a minimum wage. So that's a discussion for another time whether that's a good or a bad thing. But there is a minimum wage, 15 Rand an hour. You can't pay less. Hopefully you're paying a hell of a lot more.
Yeah. Let's talk about how factors like the frequency of work, the hours worked, transportation costs, housing costs if your employee is living with you. How do all of those affect what you should be paying?
Okay. So this is something that if you are hiring a domestic worker, all of these factors, just like when you're hiring any other employee, all of these factors are relevant in working out that person's pay. So how far they have to travel, whether meals are included, how long they're working, whether they're looking after kids, whether they're looking after animals as well, whether they have to live at your house. All of these things are relevant in working out what you're going to pay the person. So it's really important that people look at what you're asking someone to do and make sure they're being paid a fair wage. Also really crucial, and a lot of people miss this, if you have a domestic worker who's working more than 24 hours in a month, they have to be registered for UIF, the Unemployment Insurance Fund.
Oh, wow.
Most people don't do it. Really important to do it, because if that person loses their job, then they're going to be able to claim from UIF. Lastly, and crucially for people to know, is that you can't deduct things from your employee's salary. So if your domestic worker breaks something in your house, you can't deduct it from their pay. If you need to buy tools, cleaning products, etc., you can't deduct that from their pay. There, you say, of course, but these things happen. Which I mean, it should be, of course. And you definitely can't deduct their uniform or their clothes that they have to work. All of these things can't be deducted from their pay. So it's really important that people out there know those things.
And why should you, with a minimum wage of 15 Rand an hour, you should be deducting absolutely nothing. I'll be really interested in finding out the guidelines around UIF and if that needs to be deducted. I mean, people are that interested, they're just literally passing out.
Shocking news.
Such shocking news. Whether that needs to be bolted on, added on over and above, or gets taken away from. So would you add that on to your salary, or how does it work?
That's a really good question. I'd need to check the sectorial determination, but it's there. It will be be in the act whether you are deducting it or not. Again, I imagine if you're paying as little as 15 Rand an hour, then you shouldn't be deducting
Bolt that on, yeah.
Bolt that on.
Top,
That's not going to be massive amounts of money.
Yeah. So lots for us to understand when it comes to the legalities around the relationship between a domestic employer and domestic employee. If you are in that kind of situation at home, perhaps throw those questions our way. Expresso Morning Show, SABC3. That's where you will find us on Facebook. And that's why we have, of course, our friend and expert in all things law, Eitan Stern from legalese.co.za, to answer those questions for you. And we look forward to continuing this chat on the other side of the news headlines.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
We're back again with Eitan Stern from legalese.co.za, of course, our friend and expert in all things legal. And we're talking about the relationship between a domestic employer and domestic employee, the laws that govern that, what should be done, what shouldn't be done, minimum wage. We've discussed that a little bit. And I guess that leads us to the question, in the understanding of the law, is a domestic worker regarded as an employee? And then, for instance, in a lot of circumstances where an individual would be servicing the households of multiple other families or individuals around, do you then regard them as your employee in that relationship?
They're a freelancer.
Yeah, exactly.
No, for sure.
Okay, well, I mean, the whole industry exists at the moment with gig economy domestic workers. But so it's a great question, and the idea of an employee versus a contractor is extremely relevant in South African law in lots of context. Because if you're an employee, you get access to a whole lot more rights than if you're a contractor. So just like with any other worker, you go through a test, and you see, well, does the employer have control over that person's working hours? You know, do you supply the tools of the trade? There's a few questions that you ask in working out whether this person is an employee. So basically, if they are working for you the majority of the time, you decide on what they do every day or most days of the week, then they're probably going to be considered your employee. And if there are more than one family where they're considered an employee, then they can have two employers and both have to give them the same employment rights as the other one. So you can definitely be an employee in more than one place.
That being said, should there be a contract in place, and knowing that there are probably not a huge amount of contracts in place when it comes to house helpers, do the legal boundaries still apply if you don't have a contract?
Okay, for sure. So there should definitely be a contract in place. You know, just like anyone listening to this who is an employee will know, a contract gives you a lot of safety in your job. It sets the boundaries. It lets you understand where you are in your
ways as well.
100%, and it gives dignity to the employment relationship. So there should definitely be a contract in place. And I can't remember your other question.
If there isn't a contract,
if
are
there
you still
isn't a
legally
contract,
bound by the same...
For sure, you're still legally bound. So the laws apply in all instances. Laws apply whether you've got a contract or not. So you know, just because a person doesn't have a cleaner doesn't have a contract, they still get access to their labor rights through the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. And if they're an employee, whether you're calling them an employee or not, they will still have access to rights through the Labor Relations Act.
Yeah. Let's talk about how a household employee could take action against a household employer.
All right.
How they have access, and maybe name some instances wherein that's applicable.
Fantastic. So if someone is terminated, if their employment is terminated unfairly, if a cleaner has stuff deducted from their payslip unfairly, if they're treated badly, they can approach the CCMA. Just like any employee. If that doesn't work, they can go to the Labour Appeals Court and or the Labour Court and the Labour Appeals Court. So, and then there are also unions for domestic workers. So domestic workers can be part of a union, and then they've got you know, kind of power behind them. So there's definitely places that people can get recourse. And as an employer, it's just important the best advice that I can give is to get educated around the laws around hiring a cleaner. The Labour Department has some fantastic guides on their website. There's lots of resources online which just lay out the laws very, very clearly, what you have to pay, the breaks that you have to give people, all that sort of stuff. It's really laid out clearly. It's not very complicated. So I really recommend people just go online, find one of these guides, read it, and you'll be able to know exactly how you're supposed to treat your employee.
Yeah, it's also about improving each other. You want you want someone to grow in that space, and I like the fact that you use the term bring dignity to that relationship, and that's something that I hopefully has resonated with a lot of people. But I think the most important thing is you want to avoid any kind of legal ramifications in a relationship like that, because you've built a solid foundation. So educate yourself, look after your employees, 100%. Whether you have a contract yet or not, and I say yet because you must, and then maybe you also want to think about that minimum wage, which I think is
look after them like they're looking after you.
Exactly. Eitan Stern, thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break. We'll see you on the other side.